Hello everyone, my name is Burhanuddin Rashid and today I'm going to talk about a startup guide to ship mobile app faster using Flutter. Everyone can hear me? Yes. Okay, so how many of you are Android dev here? And how many have worked on Flutter? Okay, cool. So this talk is going to more about since if you are going to get out of your college and you are going to land your job, most probably it would be a startup, and this is more of a guide written on how to ship fast using Flutter. So yeah, this is about me. This is my website. I usually write blogs on widgettricks.com around Flutter, and then effective Flutter day classes which I run on weekends. So yeah, a startup guide to ship mobile app faster using Flutter. Now the first question we should be asking is that why I'm doing this talk? Why you are sitting here spending 30-20 minutes of your time to understand this? So the thing is, if everyone heard about FAANG companies? Yes, sir. Okay, so it's a Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix and Google. So if you search on an internet about how to crack a interview at a FAANG, you will get a lot of resources on the YouTube. There will be a lot of videos. How to prepare for a DSA, how you can do a better communication and all that stuff in order to crack interview at a FAANG. And also you will find a lot of scalable, buildable design system, how to build a scalable app for a WhatsApp, how to build a scalable Spotify, and everything you will find out there on the internet is already there. But when it's come to the startup world, it's very like a niche thing to be honest. And if you try to search anything around how to build app for your startup, and if you search on the internet, you will find nothing. In fact, if you try different query itself, you don't find any resources around how to do for a startup. It's all about FAANG, big companies, scalable system, and everything is there. But chances are that you won't be, like the chances are that landing your job in a startup of you is way more than the FAANG. So that's why I wrote this guide from my experience, that how should be, like we should follow in a guideline in order to ship faster app in a startup using Flutter. And don't worry if you miss anything about this talk, there is already a blog post on it, you can read it on later on. Now the first thing is, what do I mean by startup? Now startup can mean different things, but here what do I mean by startup is not an indie hacker or a solo dev. If you are the only person working on a startup, or you are the only one who is building the product, then this is not for you. Because अकेले ही काम कर रहे हो तो किसी की भी क्या क्यों ही जरूरत है? Like you are your own boss, you don't have to do anything. For example, there are examples like indie hacker and solo dev like Peter Levels and Tony, and you can check that on the internet, but I am not going to talk about those. I'm talking about a startup where you have a one CEO, CTO, tech lead at least, and one senior developer, and then you have around 1 to 2 junior developers. So it's around 3 to 6 people kind of a team in a startup. So this is where this guide will be more helpful, where you have around 3 to 6 people, and it can be more than that. So yeah. Now one thing you need to realize is why these are two different guides, because the way FAANG operates and the way startup operates is very different. And the first difference is that when you go to the FAANG, there would be a lot of processes and communication and a lot of documentation. You have to go through a lot of guidelines and set of things. In Google they have a design doc, which basically in order to ship any feature, you have to first write that design doc, and then only it will get approved and you can move forward. So it's a very long process. And because of this, what happens is that it's become really slow. If you want to ship a feature to an end user, it will take a lot of time because you have to go through all that process. And if you see in a startup, it's basically like a flash, right? It's a zoom very fast. So you have to be very fast in a startup. You can't be slow, because here you need to understand that the startup main goal, why the startup is called startup, is that because you have to ship and iterate fast based on user feedback. And this is the main theme in the startup, is that iterate fast. You have seen like how the startup grow fast, they build product fast, they ship to the user fast, they make changes to the product very fast. So that is their only motto, that they have to ship very fast. And another big difference between a FAANG and a startup is that FAANG has a lot of resources and money. So they can use whatever they want. They can have a product manager, they can have a product manager, they can have product manager. So they have a lot of money. They can have an independent team of a QA, which you can do the QA. They can have a specific framework developer, and everything is there. So they have a lot of money to invest in. But if you come to the startup, you don't have that much resources. You are very lacking in terms of time and resources. So here, the developer should have a lot of another different skill in order to make it work in the startup. So a developer in a startup basically have to build fast, and then they have to skip many things like best practices, code linter, and many other things. And then you have to manage yourself. You don't have any product manager or something like that. You should be able to manage your own self. And then you should learn very quickly. It should not take you much time. And since we are living in an AI world era where everything is just like prompt away, you should be able to learn things very quickly. And if you don't have any QA, then you have to test it yourself. And this is why I love Flutter in that sense, because the Flutter allows you to ship multiple platforms at one code base. So it saves a lot of time for multiple teams. And this is also a declarative UI. So let's say if you learn Flutter today, the way you write a UI would be helpful for other framework as well, like React, Jetpack Compose, or Swift UI. So everyone is going through that declarative UI approach. So once you learn that, you can transfer your knowledge to a different native domains, or even in web development. So if you have not read, there's a book called The Goal, and the goal is basically that you should have something to be an endpoint where you can reach to. And for any company, the goal basically depends on that the throughput of a system is directly proportional to the time taken by the biggest bottleneck. So in order to achieve your goal, I mean the time which takes a lot of time would be the time required to ship your whole product. I'll just get into more detail is that here the throughput means here in terms of mobile is that feature in user hand. How quickly you can get a feature in a user hand or a user device, it totally depends on the biggest time consuming task. So the task which takes a lot of time will define that you can ship a feature to a user. For an example, if you are doing a hiking, right? So if you have a 10 people group and you have to go from point A to B, how much time it will you take? It does not define by the fastest person in the group, because if the fastest person reach, there are still 9 other people who need to reach there. So your time of going from point A to point B would be defined by the slowest person in the group. Getting my point? So the thing which take the most of time will define the time of your entire product journey. And in terms of mobile development, your biggest goal is to have a feature in user hand, and that is basically which takes a lot of time. And the first thing which takes a lot of time in order to do that is that CI/CD. So if you like starting your project, set up the CI/CD first. Now how does it work? Let's say if you have why it's important, because let's say you have a user, right? And if you are doing a web development, in web development you can directly ship things to that user. The person has just to refresh it, and they will get the new updated changes to their code, the code changes you have pushed, it will get to that user. But when it's come to the Android and iOS, basically mobile, you cannot directly ship to the user. You have to go through App Store and Google Play Store. They will take that build and they will distribute to your user. So there are a lot of intermediate in between, which takes a lot of time. If you don't use a CI, everyone aware of CI/CD? What is CI/CD is?
Continuous integration.
Yeah. So if you don't use CI/CD, you have to follow a manual process. And what that manual process look like is that in order to ship a app, you need to build APK locally. Then you need to sign it with key store. And then you have to manually deploy to a Google Play Store, right? And you have to do the same thing for iOS. You have to build IPA locally, and you have to sign it with provision certificates. And if you know about provision certificates, it takes a lot of time, and plus it can break anytime. You don't know. Sometimes it takes hours, sometimes even it takes days. It's very hard to debug what is the certification issue happening. So if you want to do it manually, good luck and God bless you with that. And then you have to manually deploy that IPA to the App Store. So this takes a lot of time. And you might be wondering that if it's taking a lot of time, does it make a common sense to, doing a CI/CD from the day one? But my friend, the common sense is not that common, right? I have seen in every startup, most of the startup which I have worked on, that they don't set up CI/CD from day one. They do it until they are really tired of it. Like they are taking a lot of time to deploy in both store. So at that time you do it. And doing this initially is also a benefit because your app is not that big. So you don't have that much dependency, and it's very easy to build on both the artifacts and upload on the Play Store. And iteratively you can build upon it. But doing it later on takes a lot of time. So let's just take an example on how the return of investment work on this. So for example, if you have a 9th month a project, which basically translates into 36 weeks. Everyone loves maths here? No, so if you are in a programming and if you don't love maths, then you are in a wrong profession. So it takes a 36 weeks. Let's say we measure without CI/CD and with CI/CD. And if you go without CI/CD, you can do a 1 release per week because each release will take you 3 hours, around 3 hours. So 36 releases take you 108 hours. And if you go with the CI/CD stuff, let's say you don't know CI/CD, right? So you have to set up and you have to learn. So it will take a week, 40 hours around. And this 40 hours, once you set it up, it will take you 15 minutes to deploy it because it will just automate it. Now you can do 3 release per week because it's just taking 15 minutes, right? So you are doing a 3 release and it will be 108 release, and each release will take a 15 minutes of your time, which is around 27 hours. And then the initial 40 hours you did to set it up. So you have around 67 hours of time to set up the whole CI/CD. Now, this is the benefit of it. If you see closely here, without CI/CD, you did 36 releases with 108 hours. And with CI/CD, you did 108 releases with 67 hours, right? And if you know any finance person, they will say that you have reduced 38% of time, you have 200% increases the releases. So this is the benefit you get when you have CI/CD from day one. And this is really important. And I was so frustrated by, the deployment part with iOS and certificate that I created a video out of it. It's a 2-hour long video on basically I'm trying to demonstrate that how you can do it. So yeah, and then the second part is choose a state management solution. And it can be like you have to be little bit of prototyping stage. For example, I have started my journey with state, then I went to the block, then I use a provider, then I use a get it, then I use custom made solution, and I finally use a river pod. So before choosing any state management solution, you need to first understand your business use case, what your business is trying to solve. For example, is your app is fully API driven, like everything is coming from the API? Or is your local database driven? Everything happens on your local database first. Like WhatsApp, right? In WhatsApp, if you don't have internet connection, even though you can use it, even the messages you can send, they can store locally. Once they get internet back, they sync it back. So that is the definition of an offline first app. So is your app built like that? Does your app require more plugin, more third-party plugin? It's dependent on more native feature like camera, sensors, or anything like that. Or your app get more form involved. It's like kind of an insurance form or any other community form where you have to fill a lot of forms for that. So you need to understand what kind of category your app is in. Because if you ask this question and you do the prototyping part, it will basically avoid endless discussion in your group because everyone has some favorite pick, right? They like something else, other one won't like it. There is some nitty-gritty around it here, and it will go to the endless discussion. So that's why I suggest to do a prototype first. And how do you do a prototype? Is first choose any 3 solutions, any 3 state management solution by their open source reputation, how frequently it get updated, what is the author of it, how the code base is, and how the testing support of that state management solution is. And then how frequently it get updated. If there is an issue or PR has been created on GitHub repo, does it get resolved? Does it get merged? How frequently that happened? Because it basically tells you the health of that package, that they are actively focusing on to improving it. And once you have chosen those 3 solutions, choose any 2-3 important screen on your app. This 2-3 screen should be your crucial workflow for your business app. And then build this 3 solution with different 3 solution you have. So you will try to build each screen with all these 3 different solution. And it does not need to be perfect. I mean, it does not should follow any architecture guideline. You are trying to understand how this state management solution works in your business context. You will understand how the API calls happen, how local database works, how sensor works, how camera works in this state, how you can easily handle forms. Everything you will understand by prototyping it. So that's why I also suggest to have one senior developer, because one senior developer knows how to prototype it very quickly. So this is about state management solution. Then what is the best architecture? Is that the best architecture is separation of concern. Everyone start with a separation of concern, then they have a clean architecture, MVC, MVV, MVM, and then they come down to another separation of concern. One thing I have noticed, and I would like to, if you don't want to take anything away from a talk, but just take this as a talk, that don't let your feelings drive you to build something complex just to brag about it. I have seen this again and again, that everybody want to feel important and they want to build something really good, but there's a difference between good and complex, and people just start treating just because it's complex, it's a good, and it does not happen like that. Because why you want to build something complex? Because you can just tell other people about that I have built this big gigantic thing. But in real world, this makes a lot of issues, because if you make things complex, it's very harder to maintain, it takes a lot of time, and it's very hard to understand. So please don't let your feeling drive to build something complex. I have a whole article written about it, you can read that later on. And because of the architecture thing, one senior developer also comes into this play, because since they have worked on a different domain, they have a knowledge of different architecture, so they can use that whole knowledge together to build an architecture for your app. Now, what do I mean by separation of concern? I'll just give you a small example what the separation of concern mean here. For example, everyone codes right here, right? So this is the method called show message, right? It taking a string as a parameter and showing it the message to the user. Now this is a simple method, right? And your project manager or anyone above your role comes up and say that we want to also show an error message as well, right? Now what you will do? Any suggestion? Yeah, so most common thing which I have seen is that just add a boolean in between, right? Let's say is error, and then based on that boolean you show an error message or you show a success message, something like that. I call this is basically a boolean driven development, because the person just use boolean everywhere to fix anything, right? Actually, if you see this closely, actually this is not the right way of doing, because it's mixing 2 concerns. What here the 2 concerns are? Show success message and show error message. So you should have a 2 separate method called show success message and show error message, rather than merging it all in together, because those 2 have a different concern. Those 2 have different things for the user, and they will change for a different reason at a different period of time. So this is a quote by Sentiments, that you should not reach for abstraction, but instead you should resist them until they absolutely instead of one being created. Basically that means that you should wait until you see an abstraction. Don't do it from the day one. Until you see enough repetition of that problem, then do abstraction, like creating an interface or abstract class or something like that. And when it comes to the architecture part of it, keep your UI and data models separate from day one. What do you mean is that you have a UI and you have a data, right? And first thing, most common mistake I see is that when a developer starts is that what they do is they use the same API model which has used for JSON parsing on the UI also. So this is really a problematic. No matter how similar the UI and API database look like, keep them separate from day one, because they are going to change for different reason. So just keep them separate. I'll just show you an example and just add a layer in between so that you can transform UI into API response and API response into the UI. For example, I'm not sure if everyone can see this code. Yeah, mapper class. So for example, you have a notifier, right? Patient notifier, and then you want to add a patient. So you have a simple method add patient, and then here in the notifier layer, you will convert those patient UI into a request body which the backend requires. So you just convert it here, and then you pass that to the API, and then API will be success or failure based on the validation. So this is what I'm talking about, to add a layer in between your UI and data, and then transform it from UI to the data layer. So this would work as a block, notifier, repository, provider, whatever you call it. There is a widget where you have a selection, validation, and then there is a API, network, database cache. Another thing is that make your widget dumb. Your widget shouldn't know about what's happening or the business logic. So for example, you have a patient UI and you have an appointment date, right? And then you are using that appointment date to show something on a UI. For example, you are showing the icon if the appointment date is available, and also showing the message necessary if the date is available or not. So this is your patient UI passing there, and this is your basically your business logic. And what you have done is that you are exposing your business logic to the widget, and this should be moved. This should be not part of your widget tree. It should be moved to your patient UI. How exactly? For example, if you are checking appointment date here, right, you can create a separate method called has no appointment. It's more readable, and you can basically replace that condition from that method here. So now the widget doesn't know anything about what's validation happening. You just transferred it to the patient UI. Similarly, you can create a method called relative appointment date, which will basically take that appointment and show the message accordingly. This is basically this line of code, and you can move that into here. Now this will become relative appointment date. So you basically move all that logic from your widget to the patient UI. And this is how your patient UI become. And now it's very easy to testable also, because it's not dependent on any framework. Next is create your own UI app wrappers. And this is pretty much simple. Since every app is a distinct design, they have a material design, but they have their own distinct design. So you need to create some component, similar component, which you can use across your app. So for example, you can create your own fancy button. You can have your fancy loading and then fancy avatar. So it can be any name based on your app. So these are the component which you common component create around it, which is a wrapper around the existing widget available in the app. Now what you do is you just export it, each widget similar here, and then you use that to run your app, and all those widgets will come from this core UI Dart which you created earlier. Now this is similar to how like the material Dart works, but you are creating your own. Basically this will allow you to easily change your widget for your app, and not changing anything, the native widget which we have, like Flutter widget which we have available in the framework. Also you can name things based on your business domain. So like it say if the Flutter widget say is enable, you can say is available, is not, something like the variable name you can change based on your business domain. And create your own theme extension. There might be a theme where it does not support in the material app. So just have an object, two objects which have a title curve for example, and create two different objects for each theme, light theme and dark theme. And then based on a condition, you can just basically change that theme. So this is very easy to manage your themes, rather than trying to plug all your theme inside the material theme already available. Now TDD won't work, write test after breaking stuff. Anyone heard about TDD? So it's a test driven development where you write test first and then you write your code. And if you go to the TDD community, it's very surprising for that, because I'm saying this because don't write TDD. The TDD here doesn't work because the code changes a lot and the requirement and feature changes a lot, and startup also pivot a lot. Sometimes what they are building the feature would turn out to a completely different thing. So if you write a test for that, that might not be validated anymore. So my approach would be rather that don't write test upfront, write test on thing which breaks a lot. So if you see one code which breaking a lot, write a test for it. For example, if you are working on a fintech product, then you might need to show a lot of currencies with the dollar value, then you have to show comma and million, billion or something like that. So these things are really important for a business use case, and also it breaks a lot if you make any tiny change in the string. So write a test for all those scenarios, and when it breaks a lot, just write it. Similarly, you need to find other use case based on your context. And I would recommend to learn this three concept from this 3 book is basically working effectively with legacy code. It basically gives you an idea on how ugly a code base it can be. You can basically fix that writing test. And this book is like a goldmine for me, because earlier I used to afraid about, when I go to a new company, I was afraid that if the code base is so bad, how I'm going to work on it. And most of the complaint people have in the software industry is that the code is so bad that I can't work with it. So these books will give you a technique on how to handle that. And then refactoring, that if you have a design which you don't like it, or you want to change into something else, there are also some techniques which you can use to change that. And then there is a test-driven development, which I talked about, that how you can write test before writing the production code. So I think if you learn these 3 techniques from 3 books, I think you will be way ahead of the 80% or 90% of developers, because most of the people don't read books and they don't have a time to apply those techniques. So yeah, and then have a debugger for your production app. So in Flutter, you have a debug, release and profile. So everything happen on a release build. If the bug or anything happened, you don't know how to debug it. So just add some kind of a debugger in your app, which can have a special access to those emails or those users, which allows you to track all the error user ID, which you can easily use to debug the app, because it's very hard to get the user build and then find what's went wrong. And use error builder widget to identify what the issues is. For example, if you use normal debugger, you will see a red screen if anything goes wrong, but you can create your own widget to get that a good UI for that error, and then you can report it to identify what went wrong. Now, when to use a third-party package? I would say if you are going for an animation, 80% animation is available in the Flutter framework. So you don't have to go out and try to build your own. Most of them are there, like slide in, slide out, and fade in, fade out. It's more about understanding the UX on how you can add those subtle animation to make it more user great experience. So yeah, and use tool like GitHub Copilot, Cloud, and many other tools just to write those animations. So they will do all those things very quickly for you. You don't have to understand a lot of math around it. Just tell them and they will build a small animation for you. And if you are looking for some common UI element like drop down, search bar, scrolling effect, just find a package already there and then use that. Most of them you will find it. And then if you want to have an additional safety, just wrap those into a different classes, similar to how we did for on wrapping the material app like fancy button and fancy avatar. Now speed up the code review. The reason why in the small team we have a code review is that we don't want to create knowledge silos. We don't want to know in a position that if someone is not there, another person cannot work up because they don't know about the code base. So we want to have a code review. But in a startup, we want to have a little bit more faster. So to do that, just avoid nitpicking, like line format is not correct, the name is not correct, something like that. Try to have some automated lint tools to just fix that. And focus on what might change in 30-40 days rather than thinking about years. Now, what in big company happens that since it's a very large corporation and any changes you make will affect any changes you make will be there for 10 or 20 years, they think in a very long-term manner. But in a startup, you are just in a exploring phase. So rather than thinking about what will be changed in 1-2 years, think about what might change in 30-40 days. So it will allow to have a right balance between whether you want to create an abstraction or whether you want to hard code it. The reason why I kept 30-40 days is that I don't want to be in a situation where you hard code everything in your app, because if you do that, that's also a problem. And pair programming on a call. So if something is getting stuck, just try to have a quick call for around 13-15 minutes to resolve that. Especially if you are doing a code review, because code review you will do some comment, they will see it tomorrow, they'll do a comment, and then it will take a lot of time. And use a GitHub permanent link for faster navigation. This is just my take, that you can copy the GitHub link and just put it in a code review, rather than telling that go to the this class and this class and this method. You can just copy that and just paste in the code review. So they have to just click it and they can go to that code. Now, draft mode documentation. And if you ask any software engineer what they hate most about their work, day to work, is that the documentation part, because they really don't like that. Because in order to documentation, you have to write, and in order to write, you have to think. So it's very hard process. But I would say, rather than thinking a documentation is a final go-to, think documentation is in a draft mode. So why we have a documentation is because we spend more time to create existing solution. The things which is already there, we are keep creating again and again, because we don't know where it does it exist, and we search for same thing again and again. And we spend time on debugging. If something is not working, we just assume why it's not working, and we spend some time. If someone have commented a code or they have a documentation around it, it's very easy to find and debug. Now, to work as a solution, don't worry about grammar, because nowadays grammar can be fixed easily. Plus, don't worry about whether it's a politically correct or diplomatic or something like that. Just write it whatever you think that is, and just keep it there. And you don't have to use any fancy tool for the diagram also. Just handwritten notes and just paste it there, that's also enough. And use markdown file in a GitHub repo itself. Like, you don't have to hop different tools, like go to the Jira and then go to the Confluence and then go to the other documentation to find where it is. Just have a markdown file in your GitHub repo itself. So if someone is pulling your GitHub repo, they will have all the documentation with them. And it's also very easy to find when someone changed it or someone did not change it. And assume it's always in draft mode, like it's not in a publish or a perfect mode. So it will allow you to write anything about it. It won't block you to do it. Now, the last but not the least is software engineering is sociological in nature rather than technical. And this is very common. Another thing which I see is that when you work with a team, everyone becomes so technical on things that they forget the social part of it. Like, we are focused on a code a lot, but we don't think on how this code is going to affect other and how the other person who is reviewing our team going to affect it or not. Some people get code review very fast, even they write a bad code, because they have a good reputation with the other person. And someone really write a good code, but it doesn't get through because it doesn't have a good relationship with other people. Now, you are a very technical sound person, but if you are lacking on a social level, it would be very hard to survive. And this is the truth. And you will see in your day-to-day work as well, that you are really working hard, but if just someone knows someone better, get a promotion and you don't. And this has nothing to do with your technical ability. Sometimes do, but most of the time don't. It's just that how your relationship with that person is. And nowadays it's become very hard to build a relationship, because it's very transactional. People just wanted to have a conversation because they have something to do with. They don't want to build a long-term relationship. And I would hate to say this, but for the next generation which is coming, it's become very, very hard. So try to focus to build long-term relationship with people. Just don't think about this one company or one project, because I tell you one thing, we think that software is very big and it's very old, but it's not. We are just 40 years old. Medical industry is 500-year-old, and civil engineering is 1,000-year-old. So we are pretty much new. So we are not something very big in terms of it, and we think a lot about it. Just try to have this. And since we are very small, you might think that you have a fight with one person and you won't know in the other company. Chances are you will, because I've been here for like 10 years, and I have had a lot of bad fight with the people, and they know someone in the other company or the current one which I am working on, and then how the path crosses. So we are very small industry in terms of if you meet someone, chances are there that you might met it after some years. So just try to have a good relationship with people. I'm not talking about have a hardcore friendship with them, but just a good relationship with them. And if you are a company and if you can have some budget, then try to have if it's an office, then it's fine. But if you can have some trip around it in every 6 months on a year where people are very free around it and they can talk about each other or something, like kind of have a bonding relationship, then please do that. And even if you can't do it, then try it yourself to build some relationship with other people. Like have some small talk. What are you doing this weekend? Like, have you watched Deadpool, Wolverine and Deadpool or not? Like, just try to have a talk. Like, have you watched Arcane or something like that? If you have not watched this series Arcane, just watch it. It's really good, and the animation is really superb. We are thinking like AI will replace everything, but if you watch this series, you will realize that we are very far away now. Might be in the future, but for now it's not there. So yeah, that's it. This is my website, and I write Flutter about it. And also I do freelancing, so I'm open for consultation. If you have any issue with a legacy code base, want to architect your app for your startup, or you want to improve your code quality, or you want to train your existing Flutter developer, you know who to call. So yeah, thank you. And one more last thing, I also learn effective Flutter dev classes on a weekend. So if someone knows the Flutter and want to enhance their level up to their Flutter skill, just use this code CHA24, they will get a 20% discount. And this is the website for more details. So yep, and thank you. And if anyone has any question, let me know.